My boss keeps touching me. I wasn't going to lie, Gustavo Rojas was one handsome son of a gun, so handsome that he gave me a new reason to strangle him every day with that smart mouth of his. There, I didn't lie. Maybe my Nona was right. I should have finished my sewing classes. Then I'd have the right amount of skill to sew his perfect lips shut. You know, Payne, Gus said, cradling his forehead in his palm. I was expecting something else from the best caregiver at Westbrook. I rolled my eyes, focusing my attention on Miss Rojas's pillbox for the week. Sure you were. I was expecting something else from my employer too, but here you are. Gus's laugh was warm, rumbling from deep in his chest. Touché. I shook my head, labeling each section of the pillbox meticulously. Morning. Metformin for her diabetes, lisinopril for her blood pressure, and a multivitamin. I checked the list twice, making sure everything was in its place. Mrs. Rojas was extremely picky, and the last thing I wanted was to get on her bad side. Every caregiver before me had been fired for one reason or the other. I'm serious, Payne, Gus said, leaning back against the kitchen counter. You're Kinda what? I snapped, locking on to his warped reflection on the kettle's shiny surface. Wavy black hair, chiseled jaw, light gray eyes, and rippling muscles. Oh, the irony. How did he have enough time to keep fit, work hospital shifts, and make my days hell? His teasing wasn't mean-spirited, right? No, it couldn't be. It just felt like it sometimes, especially with his annoyingly perfect face and annoyingly perfect everything else. I sighed, more to myself than to him. I'm fine, Gustavo, just trying to keep up with the demands of caring for your perfect mother. He raised an eyebrow, a smile playing on his lips. Perfect, huh? You hear that, Mom? Payne thinks you're perfect. Mrs. Rojas, salt-and-peppered haired with a small figure that looked even smaller in her wheelchair, glanced over mirthlessly. He's paid to think so. That's the only reason I still keep him around. I snapped the pillbox closed with a loud clap. Just like an old knife, she was blunt, but I was used to cold women like her. Gus rolled his eyes dramatically. Believe me, even money couldn't get the others to stay. Anyway, I need to head to the hospital. As he grabbed his coat and stethoscope, I muttered under my breath, finally, some peace. Once Gus was out the door, I focused on Mrs. Rojas, who was happily knitting in her chair. Heather, let's get you comfortable. I'll be if you leave me alone, she grunted, but let me help her adjust the blanket around her legs. Tell me, why are you still here? My lips twitched. It felt demanding to admit that I was here for the money. She was right, after all. I love my job. I really did. That wasn't a lie. Sure you do. You love taking care of old hags, but I'm not one. I'm fit and healthy. She swatted my hand off. A fit and healthy old lady with a dislocated hip. Her balance wasn't the same anymore. She needed care around the house, and Gus was insistent on giving it to her. Through me. Sure, Heather, you're perfectly healthy. The rest of the day passed uneventfully. Heather remained a pain, except for brief moments where she chatted away about Gus, her stories painting him in the light of a golden boy who could do no wrong. I disagreed in my head. Gus was trouble on two long legs. Still, her stories made me smile, even if they were a bit exaggerated. As evening fell, Heather gave me permission to whip up some dinner for myself alone. Some of her drugs occasionally affected her appetite, so I didn't badger her into eating dinner too. I made my way to the kitchen, plugging my earphones into my ears and selecting my Nirvana playlist. Cooking was my therapy, and I needed it today. I wondered if Joey had anything to eat today. My mother promised to make her eat, and I hoped she listened. I continued to dance around the kitchen, moving my hips to the beat as I chopped vegetables and stirred my signature pasta sauce. The aroma of garlic and tomatoes filled the air, mingling with the thud of the knife on the cutting board. I watched my pasta boil, pondering a final attempt at getting Heather to eat. No, she'd snap my head off. In my zone, lost in the music, I felt a hand on my waist. Gus never came home early, and Heather, well, little Miss Rojas, was in a wheelchair. My heart leapt into my throat, and I spun around, swinging the sauce-stained spoon in my hand at the attacker, ready to defend myself. The spoon collided with a face, splattering marinara everywhere. Gus lay on the floor, eyes wide, his handsome face now stained with sauce. He blinked, a slow smile spreading across his features. Well, that's one way to greet someone. I was livid. What the hell, Gus? You can't just sneak up on people like that. He held up his hands in surrender, wiping at the sauce with his sleeve. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. I was just going to say hi. Hi? Hi with his hand on my waist? What's up with him? My anger simmered down, but I wasn't about to let him off the hook that easily. You're lucky this wasn't a knife. Noted. Can I at least have some of whatever you're cooking? It smells amazing. He grinned unfazed. His blue shirt was now a write-off. I hoped he wouldn't make me pay for it. Fine, but sit down. You look ridiculous with that sauce on your face. Gus chuckled, taking a seat at the kitchen table. I grabbed a clean towel, wetting it under the tap before handing it to him. He dabbed at his face, and I couldn't help but smirk. You missed a spot. He leaned forward, eyes twinkling. Care to help? I rolled my eyes, but took the towel, gently wiping the sauce from his cheek. You're impossible. And you're a lifesaver, he said, stealing a glance at the pot on the stove. What's for dinner? Pasta, I replied, turning back to stir the pot. You can have some, but only if you behave. Gus chuckled. I'll try my best. We sat on the couch later, with me icing his cheek. Hold still, I whispered, leaning over him. His eyes were on me, and I could feel his gaze drifting lower. A cold draft of air swept over my chest. My shirt's neckline had shifted, revealing more than I intended. Like a prude, I shot upright. Swelling looks better. I should go. He looked surprised. You're not staying for dinner? No, I insisted, gathering my things. It's better if I reduce my interactions with you. I'm here for your mother. But I hired you, and we weren't even doing anything inappropriate. We weren't, but a part of me enjoyed his attention, and I didn't go out much, but I knew I was quite the looker with blonde hair and blue eyes. Being good-looking helped a whole lot when it came to interviews and getting jobs, but it wasn't supposed to help me have private time with my boss. Exactly. You're my employer. Thanks for the reminder. Gus's gaze was different. It lit a fire in me. I knew better than to get attracted to a man who looked, talked, and sounded as straight as Gus. To make matters worse, Heather would rip me apart. Gus opened his mouth to protest, but I was already out the door. The cool evening air hitting my face. Maybe tomorrow would be different, or maybe, just maybe, Gus would finally learn to keep his distance. The next morning, I was up before dawn, the morning air crisp against my face as I rode my bike to the Rojas household. The sun hadn't risen and the streets were still quiet, save for the occasional bark of a dog or the distant hum of a garbage truck. The cool breeze helped clear my mind, preparing me for another day with the ever-charming Gustavo. Arriving at the house, I could already feel the tension. Gus was in a foul mood. It was written all over his handsome face as he stormed around the kitchen, slamming cabinet doors. Morning, I greeted, trying to keep things light. His silence was answer enough. Heather's attending doctor, Simeon, was due to arrive soon to check on her progress. As I set about preparing breakfast, I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nerves. Simeon was not only a competent doctor, but also, objectively speaking, quite the looker. I had worked with him before on one of my old clients. Heather's excited chatter filled the air. Her enthusiasm for the upcoming visit was obvious. The first person she doesn't hate. Great. When Simeon finally arrived, his smile was as warm as the morning sun breaking through the clouds. Good morning, everyone, he greeted, with brown eyes crinkling at the corners. Good morning, Dr. Simeon, I replied, feeling my cheeks heat up as I met his gaze. God, Payne, get a grip. He's just a doctor. A very cute doctor, but still, just a doctor. And he's not as good-looking as Gus. Heather practically beamed at him. Oh, Dr. Simeon, it's so good to see you. I thought you were tired of me, handing me to Payne like a hot potato. Simeon glanced at me, his smile widening. I'm sure he has been doing great. How are you doing, Payne? Fine, I stammered, feeling my face grow even hotter. Just, making sure Heather's got everything she needs. Gus, who had been brooding in the corner, decided to chime in. Try not to drool over your fellow man, Payne. I felt a pang of hurt and embarrassment. Being under Simeon's gaze now felt like a hot knife. Was Gus homophobic? I usually kept my sexuality under wraps around the older generation. It was to be expected that they wouldn't wave a rainbow flag at me, just like with my own mother, but to hear from Gus, that stung. Simeon, seemingly oblivious to the tension, continued his checkup, and I assisted where needed, making sure to stay out of Gus's way. My responses to him grew colder, more distant. When it was time for Simeon to leave, I walked him to the door, exchanging a few more pleasantries before he left. Returning to the living room, I found Gus waiting, already dressed for his shift at the hospital. His good looks were hard to ignore, but I forced myself to look away, focusing on anything but him. Are you all right? He sneered, the usual warmth in his eyes replaced with irritation. Don't get too comfortable, Payne. We're not buddies just because we banter sometimes. Geez, I know we're not braiding each other's hair anytime soon. I just wanted to know why his panties were up in a bunch. I flinched at his words, my gaze wandering to the numerous awards and certificates decorating the room. All of them carried Gus's name. What made us so different? He was older than me by just a year, but he had achieved so much, and here I was, just a caregiver. The comparison felt like a punch to the gut. It was truly a thief of joy. The rest of the day was a blur, my mood sinking lower with each passing hour. By the time my shift ended, I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I hopped on my bike, praying I wouldn't run into Gus on his way back from the hospital. Thankfully, I didn't. My home was a street away from the Rojas estate, just beyond the train tracks. It was so close, yet it was so different. The folks went to bed early around here, and my bike's wheels turned loudly in the silence of the street. I rode into the driveway of a small house, setting my bike on the grass. No one was going to steal anything here. The front porch creaked as I stepped inside. Peeling white paint decorated the walls. The roof in dire need of repair, and inside, the furniture was old, the fabric threadbare in places. Truly, Gus and I aren't buddies. My mother was slumped on the couch, watching TV with a blank expression. The rest of the house was dead quiet. "Mom, where's Joey?" I asked, panic rising when I didn't see my sister. My mother didn't even look up, adjusting her trucker hat over her graying curls. "Somewhere around. I'm tired of hearing her scream every time someone tries to help her. That autistic, non-verbal bastard." My heart broke a little more at her words, and I hurried into the house. "Joey? Joey," I yelled. It's not like I was expecting a response. She wasn't in her room or mine. I continued to search until only the kitchen was left. "Joey, are you here?" I crouched down, finding Joey under the table, her big blue eyes wide with fear. "Hey, Joey," I smiled gently, stretching my hand to grab her. "It's me, Payne." She flinched when I reached out, filling the room with her screams again. Joey wasn't this reactive when I left this morning. I thought her sessions with her doctors were helping. My mother echoed her shouts. "Leave the damn girl alone, my ears are bleeding." I persisted, rushing off to Joey's bedroom to grab her small stuffed elephant. I placed it just out of reach under the table, watching as Joey slowly came out to grab it. She clutched it to her chest, her eyes meeting mine for a brief moment. I gently took her hand. "You're safe with me, Joey. Always." My mother muttered from the living room. "It's not like you're any better, you deviant man lover. The devil really touched all my children." Her anger slid off my back as usual, but it still hurt. I refused to hide who I was, not from her, not from anyone. My problem can't be fixed. You can't hate the gayness away. My new focus was on getting Joey a tablet, something that could help her communicate. I'd seen it work wonders for another client's son. She would love it. As I settled Joey in bed, my thoughts drifted back to Gus. Sure, he was an asshole, but at least people like him helped me afford things for Joey. The next day at the Rojas mansion. The next afternoon found me napping on the couch while Heather also took a nap. Joey had refused to sleep until well into the night. She insisted I read her the same story over and over, turning me into a panda-eyed caregiver. "Payne." I rolled over sleepily. The voice sounded familiar. "Payne." The voice called again, and this time I was startled awake by a shadow looming over me. Blinking, I found myself staring into Gus's handsome face. "Jesus, you scared me," I yelped, sitting up. "Not my intentions." Gus straightened up, adjusting his silver cufflinks. "I just wanted to give you this." He handed me a check, and I frowned. "What's this?" "It's payday," he said, his tone softer than usual. "Your first payday." "I can't accept this," I protested, pushing the check back towards him. My head spun from counting the zeros. $10,000! "You need to pay through the agency." The caregiver agency I worked with deducted a fixed percentage from all my payments. "I already did." He glanced away, pretending I didn't just return the check to him. "Take it. This is for you. A thank you and a sorry." I stared at him, surprised, but at the same time, I snatched the check out of his hands and tucked it into my pocket. "You're apologizing?" "Yeah," he admitted, sinking onto the couch next to me, his presence making my skin tingle. "I acted out yesterday. I wasn't expecting him to even think about it twice or even apologize, but he did. I kept trying to form a perception of him in my head, but I just couldn't. Gustavo Rojas was an enigma." "Why did you flip out on me yesterday?" Gus exhaled, pursing his lips to form a whistling motion. "I lost a patient at work overnight. It's hard, knowing you can't always save them." His vulnerability caught me off guard. His curls laid limp on his forehead as his gray eyes were bloodshot. I placed a hand on his shoulder, giving it a comforting squeeze. It's okay, Gus. You are not the god. For some reason, your mother thinks of you as some miracle worker, but it's okay to be human. Thank you. He placed his warm hand on mine, a mix of gratitude and sorrow in his eyes. His touch was warm, sending tingles from my fingers to my chest. Being a doctor had to be draining. In all my years of being a caregiver, I was never present when the death rattle took over. It had become my greatest fear. The very sound of death. Imagine having to deal with it daily. I wrapped my arm around his neck, tugging him into a hug. You're very strong. His hands remained limp by my side, reminding me of who he was. This was too close for comfort. I tried to pull back, but Gus pulled me closer, wrapping his arms around my waist in a tight grip. Don't go, let me just stay here for 5 minutes. We sat there in silence, the weight gone, for just a second, just two people finding solace in each other's presence. I sniffled, feeling a tingle in my throat. This called for some lemon water. Hopefully, I won't fall sick. Even if I did, it was Friday. I'm sure I'll be brand new by Monday. Monday morning. I woke up to the dull throb of a headache, my nose stuffed and throat scratchy. I could hear the faint rustling of Joey moving around the house. Rolling over, I grabbed my phone and sent a quick text to Gus, explaining why I couldn't come in today. I could only hope Gus would understand. Sleepy, I tried to take another nap, but sleep eluded me. The sounds of Joey's movements through the paper-thin walls, coupled with my own discomfort, kept me awake. I groaned, pulling the blanket over my head. For a moment, everything went still, until a knock at the door jolted me upright. Through the fog of my sickness, I could make out Joey's excited giggles with someone at the door. My heart pounded as I swung my legs off the bed and stumbled downstairs, each step making my headache worse. Joey, I called, my voice raspy. What did I tell you about opening the door? I rounded the corner to find Joey standing on a makeshift step stool, her eyes wide with pride. Shockingly, standing in the doorway was the last person I expected to see. Dressed in sweat-drenched workout clothes was Gus. At least, I can confirm that he goes to the gym. Gus? My voice cracked in surprise. Hi, Payne. You look like hell. Joey pointed to her stool, a triumphant smile on her face. I yanked lightly on her braid in response, running a hand through my messy hair. I was annoyed but touched by her efforts to not disturb me. You still need to tell me, Joey. Before I could scold her some more, Joey tugged on Gus's pants, stretching her arms out toward him. Gus, unfazed, bent down and lifted her into his arms. She giggled, her cheeks turning pink. What are the odds that my sister and I have the same taste in men? I felt a pang of worry. What if Gus thought Joey was weird? Come in, I said, stepping aside and hoping the mess wouldn't be too off-putting. Inside, Gus set Joey down gently, his eyes scanning my pale face. He placed the back of his hand on my forehead. His touch felt cold on my warm skin. You've got a fever, he observed. Have you taken anything? Cold medicine? Fever reducers? I shook my head, too tired to argue. Gus nodded, pulling out his phone to order food. Let's get some food in you first. I should have some meds in my car. We moved to my room. At least, it was a bit more presentable than the living room. Joey trailed behind us, turning into Gus's little shadow. He settled on my bed, eyes focused on me. Joey climbed up next to him with a contented sigh, keeping her own gaze on his face. It felt like a weird staring competition. Joey, should I call Emery to take you to school? I've got someone to look after me now. I kept my tone warm, trying to coax her, but she shook her head, her silence speaking volumes. I sometimes wish she would just talk to me, even if not to other people, just to me. The food came and I ate, kicking it down with the drugs Gus gave me. Eventually, Joey's eyes dropped and she fell asleep in Gus's arms. I gently lifted her and carried her to her own bed, tucking her in with a kiss on her forehead. I paused outside my door, building the courage to face Gus. When I entered, Gus was sprawled comfortably on my bed. He patted the empty space beside him. Come on, get some rest. He was acting more like the house owner. Too exhausted to protest, I crawled in next to him. Gus wrapped me in a blanket, pulling me close. The warmth and comfort of his hug were surprising and very intimate, like a lover's embrace. Is she autistic? Gus asked after a long silence. His question caught me off guard. Yes, I murmured, my eyes fluttering shut. High or low? Quite low, I sighed. Talking about Joey was a sore spot for me. I wasn't embarrassed of her or anything, I just didn't want to turn her into a weird conversation topic. Aren't you going to work? Night shift, Gus replied, his chest vibrating against my cheek. I now understand why you work so hard. I barely registered the soft kiss on my forehead before I drifted off to sleep. In the evening, When I woke, the room was dim. Joey was curled up beside me, her blue eyes blinking sleepily. I tickled her belly, causing a sleepy giggle to escape her lips. Gus must have left while I slept. My phone buzzed with a message and I picked it up. I hope you feel brand new tomorrow. Love, Gus. Love, Gus? What was that supposed to mean? Did it even mean anything? I carried Joey downstairs. My mother was there, but instead of her usual TV watching, she was staring at the floor. Mom, are you okay? I asked, setting Joey down. Her response was to fling a TV remote at my head, her face twisted in anger. How dare you bring a man into your bed in my house, you devil! I sidestepped her throw, wincing as it crashed against the wall instead. My heart sank. She had seen Gus. I hope she didn't say anything to him. He's my boss. Nothing is going on between us. Do I look like a child? You're so unholy. Unholy? The filial son who works his ass off all the time is unholy? And you are? I fired back in response. You drink, smoke, gamble all day and you're lecturing me about holy? I'm just living my life. Remember, I am your mother. It's my duty to keep you from the heat of hell. Gay people go to hell. Her hypocrisy was too much. She believed even sinners would go to heaven, but me being who I am will be sent to hell. The anger and frustration that had built up over the years boiled over. You know what? I'm done with you. I pay all the bills in this house, and I'll be damned if I can't live my life here. It's either you get used to me and Joey, or you get out. The silence that followed was heavy. For the first time, I felt a sense of liberation. I had finally stood up for myself, and it felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I wasn't a sinner. The next morning at the Rojas mansion. I arrived at the Rojas home the next morning with a spring in my step. The cool morning air freshened my senses. The previous day's fever was gone, leaving only a slight tickle in my throat. Heather was in a rare good mood, humming softly to herself as I entered her room. Good morning, Heather. So, you know you have a client, she grumbled, running a comb through her hair. How are you feeling now? I paused in shock, almost dropping the pill box in my hand. Was she showing concern? I'm better now, thank you. Gus is asleep upstairs. He had a night shift yesterday, so let's keep the noise down. I nodded in agreement, feeling guilty. He also had to take care of me yesterday. I shook it off and focused on Heather. Breakfast passed uneventfully and I cleaned up. She looked up from her book, her familiar gray eyes twinkling mischievously. The agency sent a replacement yesterday. He wasn't as bad as I thought. Gus chose that moment to descend the stairs, his laughter echoing through the room. That's a lie. She hated him, he said, shaking his head. He made her take her meds, eat, and even dragged her outside for some sunlight. Heather huffed, crossing her arms. Sunlight therapy, she mimicked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I was roasted alive. So she preferred me? I chuckled, helping her to her feet. Simeon did say you need to walk more. Simeon, are you guys that close? Gus hissed, grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl. Yes and no. He was also the doctor for my previous client. I am familiar, but we're not close. Gus seemed to let out a sigh of relief before joining me and helping Heather to the living room. Our hands brushed as we steadied her. I felt my face flush and I quickly looked away, pretending to adjust a pillow on the couch. Next to the grand windows, I moved Heather's favorite chair into the warm rays of the afternoon sun. She settled into it with a satisfied sigh, the light softening her harsh features with a golden hue. Gus turned his head, motioning for me to join him in the kitchen with a tilt of his chin. I needed to thank him, so I obeyed. Inside the kitchen, he pressed the back of his hand to my forehead. Your temperature is lower now. I hadn't even thanked him for coming over yesterday. Why do you care so much? I asked, trying to sound casual. A lot of thoughts went crazy in my head, and I tried to avoid the most obvious one. Gus shrugged, a playful smile tugging at his lips. Because I like you. I blinked, caught off guard. I half expected it, though. What? I liked you from the moment I saw you at the agency, he shrugged, simply as if he was talking about the weather. That's why I chose you, but you were working with another client at the time. My mind raced. No wonder Gus had been acting so weird since I started working here. It was a bit satisfying to know that he liked me too. I grinned, teasing him. You acted more like a creep than a crush. Gus's face turned a lovely shade of pink, and he looked away. Noted. I couldn't help but laugh. So, What do you think about me? Gus asked, his tone more serious now. Joey really likes you. I'm sure she wouldn't mind seeing you around, I dodged, trying to keep the mood light. So what if he liked me? I came with a lot. His mother would probably skin me alive, too. With how perfect she thinks Gus is, she would be shocked to find out that he's gay. I didn't want Gus to go through the same thing my mother put me through. Mrs. Rojas loved him, and I would like it to remain that way. I'm not talking about your sister, Gus insisted, his voice low and intense. I meant you. I've been going at your pace and taking steps back when you want me to, but it's driving me crazy. I peeked into the living room, my heart racing when I saw Heather watching us with a knowing look. Gus's arms were caging me against the kitchen counter, and our faces were almost touching. It's not what it looks like, I stammered, trying to explain, but Gus refused to budge. He's just asking me some questions. Heather rolled her eyes dramatically. Do I look like a fool? Just give the boy an answer. Watching him trail after you like a sad dog is almost pitiful. Excuse me? I choked, shocked by her bluntness. You're okay with this? What's it got to do with me? She snapped, her tone dripping with annoyance. Give the boy an answer and get me out of the sun. My skin is starting to burn. Gus chuckled, shaking his head. You seem shocked that my mother knows I'm gay. Astounded, I admitted. Were mothers usually okay with their only child being gay? Gus couldn't hold back his laughter. She's known for the past 10 years. It's not something I can hide, you know. I felt a twinge of jealousy. Even with her sharp tongue, Mrs. Rojas accepted Gus for who he was. Yet my mother... Gus seemed to understand, patting my head affectionately. She will too, just wait. But don't let her hurt you. You deserve more than that. His words hit me where it hurt, wrapping around my broken heart like a bandage. Unable to hold back any longer, I leaned in and kissed him. The feel of his lips against mine was electric. Gus responded with a hunger that made my knees go weak. He let out a satisfied groan, sending chills down my spine. His arms tightened around me, holding me close to his chest as if he never wanted to let go. For the love of God, Mrs. Rojas's voice cut through our moment. My food comes from that kitchen. Gus, don't devour the poor boy. Embarrassed, I pushed Gus away, my face burning. I hurried to get Mrs. Rojas out of the sun, feeling her sharp gaze on me. You're kinda cute when you're flustered. What's with this family, teasing me at every turn? Gus grinned. If you think Payne is cute, you should see his little sister Joey. Mrs. Rojas's eyes lit up with excitement. Bring Joey to work with you tomorrow. She can get really rowdy sometimes, I lied, finding it strange that Heather would want a child running around here. No, Heather swatted my hand off hers. Don't show up if you won't bring Joey with you. That's your new password to gain access to this house. Gus pressed his lips against my earlobes. She's always wanted a daughter. You didn't have to come so close, I grumbled, feeling uncomfortable under Heather's gaze. Finally, I nodded, agreeing to bring Joey over. Gus grabbed his bag and stethoscope, placing a kiss on my lips and another on his mother's cheek. She scowled, wiping it off. I know where those lips have been. I couldn't help but laugh, feeling a sense of belonging and acceptance that I didn't even know I needed. As surprising as it may sound, Mrs. Rojas turned out to be Joey's other half. Maybe there was something in the Rojas' blood that attracted Joey. First, it was Gus, and now his mother. Mrs. Rojas also doted on Joey, moving her from her old school to a better one a few blocks away from the Rojas home. I slept over more often. Gus insisted on it, and Joey would cry every time we had to leave. My mother didn't seem to mind, living her life as usual, but I was done looking for acceptance in the wrong places. So what if she cursed me to eternal damnation? At least I had Gus with me, and judging by his constant words of assurance, he'd rather burn with me. The end. Would you consider dating your employer? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force, and stay wholesome.